The Equal Justice Initiative is Brian Stevenson's organization. It's one I gave money to through ACA. The lawyer who works in the South. This is his organization that's doing this. I think they started it in Atlanta. And he's got like a human rights museum or something.
More. They need to get along. It starts at 1.
Okay.
I think I can sign into it. And do one.
Chance at 1 o'clock. And then I think it's 30% chance at 2. I will.
Wanna go out, buddy? Come on, come on, come on, come on. Okay, don't. Is Sam coming back here?
He said he was gonna pick up Lana. I don't know.
Check out this group, make sure it's coming.
know. Yes. I got something in my throat. I'm do well, no, I'm just sitting in the chair. I'm waiting for a Zoom meeting to start at 2, but I really want to take a nap.
Let's do it.
I'm okay. Well, I think not. I had a little. I think it might have backed me up.
What are you listening to?
Somebody's on.
Yeah, and
Hello. Hello. There's water in the basement, in the utility room, on the floor. I don't know where it came in, but the rug got wet.
Morning, everybody. There's a few early birds here. Great. William, where are you from? You can unmute yourself for a moment.
I'm from Olathe, Kansas. Did
Oh,
that
yeah?
work? Yeah, I met you before at Peculiar. You did a or Belton maybe. You did a talk last year there with I don't know. There must have been 100 people there at a church.
Oh, in Kansas City?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, what are you doing these days?
Well, I'm been reading your books. I've read like 5 or 6 now.
Oh, yeah. Is it been helpful?
Which I loved. My wife and I
Huh?
read together. My wife and I read your autobiography together out loud, and it was awesome. We loved it. Loved it. Just
That's
great.
good.
Yeah.
That's only a third of what I wrote.
Oh,
I wrote
really?
1,000 pages and they cut it all. Can you believe that? I couldn't believe it.
Well, I don't know. You had a lot of, you were quite the mischievous guy.
Thank you very much. Hold on a second. I'm going to take a call here. What do you do there in Kansas City?
I'm retired.
Oh, okay.
And
How did you hear about this project?
Well, I followed you on Pache Benny with the
Oh, okay, good. Yeah.
the podcasts, and then they sent out a thing and said that you had moved to the Beatitudes
Yeah,
ministry in California, and I've grown so much listening to your books and your lectures, and I'm very pleased
oh, good.
in our
Good,
lives.
Good. Good. Now, who else do we have here? Mary Louise and Jean Paul. You are in Texas, I think, and owner, I don't know who's owner. Actually, then there's Mary Louise, there's two Mary Louises. So, and you're, I guess, all muted, but you can say hello if you want. And John Paul, you're in Dallas, a lay contemplative. I'm reading all that. No camera, no mic. Anyway, welcome. Be at peace. Glad you're here. Glad you're reading Gandhi. And we're nice and early. So I'm expecting about 55 people,
Wow, good.
but maybe we'll be lucky to get 15 of them.
You mentioned in one of your books about Syria, and you made mention about places in the Middle East where there were a lot of problems, and you mentioned Syria. And I read a book on Syria this last week about the secret library in Dariana. They were isolated out, and they were just getting bombed every day. And there was about 12,000 people living in this town out of Damascus. And they started it was nonviolent resistance to the government. And they started collecting books out of the rubble, and they built an underground library. And every day people would come, as for something other than propaganda. They would read the books, and they did everything they could to keep this library going, and they were able to maintain the resistance for 4 years, and then they got under siege, and they ran out of food, and they ran out of everything, so they had to quit.
And this is a book about it?
Yes. Oh, it's
That
wonderful.
sounds really wonderful, really creative nonviolence.
Yes.
Beautiful and life-giving,
Yes.
for those poor people. Wow. I don't know that book. Maybe I've heard about that. But that's very beautiful and hopeful. Patty Keene, welcome wherever you are. And
Thanks, Plymouth, Mass.
how's it going out there in Plymouth, Mass? How's the weather?
Beautiful today. Absolutely beautiful. It's warm, beautiful, perfect.
Are you right on the water?
We're on a little pond, but we're only like 10 minutes from the ocean. So
Oh, well, then I'm not feeling that sorry for you, Patty.
no, don't feel sorry at all. I have a very blessed life.
How did you hear about this program?
Oh, I've been following you for a while. I attended the Advent series you did.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I've been reading it for a while. John
Did you like
Ooney
that?
in Boston. Do you know Father John Ooney in Boston?
I don't
He
think
gave
so.
out your books after Mass, maybe 10 years ago.
Okay.
He said, read this guy.
Okay.
Yeah, so he's a good guy. But I found the Advent very enriching. And in fact, you had made a passing comment on nonviolent communication, that book.
Yeah.
I'd never heard of it. So actually, a man who also attended the Advent, he and I got together, and now we're running a group on nonviolent communication over Zoom.
Wonderful. Did you study that book? Did you make one of their programs?
No,
They
we're
were-
just doing it chapter by chapter, and it's life-changing.
Marshall Rosenberg.
Right, it's life
Yeah.
changing.
So they're a global operation now with hundreds of staff people, and they do week-long programs. And they're affecting millions of people around the world. They're much bigger than anything that I've ever been associated with. But you might actually like to call their offices and talk to them about getting, a trainer's manual or
I might
watching one
want
of theirs.
to, absolutely, because I work with families who are estranged.
Uh-huh.
And so from one another, I'm trying to support parents whose children have estranged themselves. And in reading this book, I realize how we inadvertently,
Yeah,
I mean, it's what
It's
we've
in-
been trained.
it's incredible. It's
It's
all language.
incredible.
It's
Yeah,
all, and that guy is a total genius.
yeah.
We're talking about this book by Marshall Rosenberg called Nonviolent Communication, which has been life-changing for millions of people. It's really great. Well, that's good work.
So thank you for mentioning that.
Good.
Yep.
Lainey, where are you from?
I gotta go take out the
Clinton,
dog.
Iowa.
What?
Oh, sorry. Clinton, Iowa on the Mississippi.
Come on.
I know Clinton, Iowa.
Do you?
Welcome. And Michael Walsh,
How
welcome.
do you know Clinton?
Well, I know the sisters there.
Yeah,
So I've
I'm an
spoken there.
associate and they're archivists. So
Oh, good, good. Debbie, welcome. Where are you from, Debbie?
Hi, I'm south of Chicago a little bit, in Markham, Illinois.
Did I write to you?
I think so.
I think I was in touch with you about something, but anyway, maybe
Well,
not.
we've met several times and, I'm excited about this. This is my birthday present to myself. I turned 65.
Oh, happy
next week.
birthday.
Thanks.
You can't go wrong with birthdays and resurrection at the same
I
time.
know, it's
That's a
great.
good strategy.
It's great.
So welcome, Paul, welcome. Wherever you are from. Michael, where are you? What's happening with you these days?
Belinda, California, down
Oh,
south.
yeah. You're
Yeah.
down the road. You were on this Lent class
Yes,
and you're back for more? You're
Yes.
glutton for punishment?
gotta finish it up. Gotta finish
Oh,
it up.
man.
That's Mike.
Hey, Sharon, welcome. How you
Good,
doing,
Sharon.
Sharon?
Good, how are you?
Good.
Good. David was
What's-
here, but he just walked off, so.
Yeah, he just stormed out.
Yeah.
What's happening in Joplin?
Well, it's kind of chilly and cloudy today. We had fierce thunderstorms last night, which were wonderful. Lots of beautiful lightning and wind and heavy rain and all those wonderful things that we get in the Midwest that we hardly ever got when we lived in California. So
Good.
Tomorrow
Sharon,
is
this is my
7.
friend Pete. Hey, Peter from New Jersey.
hi,
Hi,
Pete.
John.
So great to see you. How you been?
We've been well, thank you. We both are vaccinated,
Mhm.
but because
Lucky.
we live in New Jersey, we have to still keep a low profile.
Yeah.
It's-
Well, that's good. That's good. And everybody's okay?
Yeah. Well, the kids haven't gotten their vaccines yet because in New Jersey, they don't qualify for them yet. So, but no one's gotten sick from COVID.
That's good. Do you see next month would be Dan's 100th birthday?
I saw that listed. Yeah, I was going to sign up for that.
Oh, you're gonna take the thing? That's gonna be, it's just utterly amazing. Did you know our friend Ramsey who died last night?
I hadn't heard that he had died, but.
Yeah, he just died and there's a big obituary on the front page of the New York Times. Did you know him?
Not specifically, no. but
Through Dan? No, okay. Well, anyway, it's nice to see you. Long time no see.
Kathy just wants to stick her head in and say hello.
Hey, Kathy,
Hi, John.
so nice to see you. Happy Easter. How are you?
Thank you. I'm wonderful. It's so wonderful to see you.
Yeah,
You haven't aged one day.
I'm worse than ever. I'm very old. Are you keeping an eye on himself?
Yes, I'm taking good care of this man.
Is he behaving?
Sometimes.
Yeah, I worried. You can call me.
I can't wait to see you in person.
Well, so nice to see you. Be well, Kathy.
Thank you, John.
And welcome John and Diane and Lee. And who else am I seeing here? Paul and Nona and Carol.
I'm hoping to get in here.
Mary Louise, is that you?
That's me, John.
Where are you from?
I'm from Delaware. You were here visiting us a couple of years ago with Pachman Terrace.
Oh, you know you have 2 Zooms on.
Is that what the problem is?
Yeah,
Wait a
there's
minute.
2 of you.
You only,
Maybe you're bilocating or something else is going on.
I've been having trouble with my computer for a while. Let me see.
Well, you've registered twice, so thank you for your big contribution.
Well, you're very welcome. Let me if I can get in. Oh, here I am, I think.
Welcome to Kathy in Salt Lake City. Carol, wherever you are,
Here I am.
welcome.
There I am. I'm right next.
Harry Guy, welcome from Washington, D.C.
Happy Easter, everyone.
Happy Easter. Harry's my friend. He's a Jesuit from Washington, D.C. And we were friends together at Duke before we both entered the Jesuits a whole millennia ago. But that's another story. Fred, welcome. Not Fred, but so we'll start in a few more minutes. Ruth Ann, who's my assistant, is a little delayed, so hopefully we'll just wing it. And if we have any problems, just be patient. If I get disconnected, I'll try to come back on. So you're lucked out and you'll get a little break. But feel free to get any coffee, food, use the restroom, have a journal, get your Bible. Or if you need something a little stronger to get you through this session, I won't say anything, Peter, whatever is necessary.
Should we get our Bible, John? Seriously.
Yeah, if you want, I'm going to read Luke 24, so you can read along if you want. I always use the New American Bible, which is my favorite. And again, you can type in any questions under chat. And but if you want to go ahead and start muting yourselves, that will be fine as we get ready to start in 2 minutes or so. We'll see. Kathy, thank you so much for your card and the gift. Really appreciate it. Very nice. Hope you're doing well out there in Salt Lake City, Utah.
Yes.
I don't know what you're doing in Salt Lake City, Utah, but I hope you're doing well. So again, good morning and welcome everybody who's just joining us. Berlia, is that you? Hey, and Bill Lewis, hello, welcome. Someone named Ann, welcome. Women for Joe, whoever you are, welcome. So if you could mute yourselves, that'd be good. Because there's an echo otherwise. Testing. So please mute yourselves. That will help with the echo.
Can't find it.
It should be on the bottom left. Again, so please mute yourselves, everybody. That might help with the echo. Vicky.
Okay,
Peter,
hi.
mute yourself and see if that helps with the echo. There's an echo here.
John, can you mute everybody?
Possibly. But I'm not that confident. Let me test. I don't think the echo is working or on now, right? It seems better. So I'd rather just have you all mute yourselves, and then later when we have conversation, you can unmute yourselves. Usually Ruth Ann is here and she mutes everybody, but she's not here yet, so you're lucked out. Hello, Emily, way down in Silver City, long time no see. Are you well? Give me a thumbs up. How's everybody else? Good?
We're all well. Yeah, making it through.
Who is we in this scenario?
Well, Dan and Ella, Mary Burton Risley. Trying to think of who else you know that's still in this area.
Is Mary still there? Mary's up in Santa Fe.
She is in Santa Fe, but I see her every week because we're in the same contemplative prayer centering group.
Oh, great.
So
good.
And she was just down here visiting.
Oh, great. And how's the baby?
The baby's almost 13.
Okay, I must have been referring to somebody else. How's the 13-year-old?
Fine.
It's wonderful. Emily is part of our Pax Christi, New Mexico group, and she had a little baby, which was now 13 years ago. I forgot. Anyway, glad all is well down there on the border of Mexico. So I have 11:03. And we have almost 30 people, having about 55 sign up. So I figure they'll just come in whenever they come in, okay? So I'm just going to go ahead and start then, okay? So, good morning and welcome everyone, and a very happy Easter to all of you, to each and every one of you. I hope you're all doing very well. So today I'm going to reflect with you on the meaning of Easter, and then we'll read and discuss the famous story from Luke 24, the road to Emmaus, and then we'll have time for questions and conversation. We'll go an hour and a half or more if you want. And just to remind you also, please keep yourselves muted, but then you can write questions and comments in the chat and write to each other if you want as we go along. Ruth Ann is here and she can help with any technical difficulties. We're also recording this, and tomorrow or Monday, we will send you the recording links so you can watch it again if you want. And good, so let's begin with a little prayer. So I invite you to take a moment in silence and just take a deep breath and relax and notice how you're feeling this morning. And let's enter into the presence of the God of peace who loves you infinitely. And let's welcome the risen Jesus here into our hearts and into our Zoom community. And let's take a moment to ask for whatever Easter graces we need. So we'll pray. God of peace, thank you for all the blessings of life and love, but most of all for the resurrection of the nonviolent Jesus. Bless us now as we reflect on his resurrection, that we might always welcome his resurrection gift of peace, that we might always share his Easter graces, peace, hope, and joy, and that we too might be witnesses and apostles of resurrection peace, and therefore do our part to help end war, poverty, racism, nuclear weapons, systemic violence, and environmental destruction, and welcome your reign of peace on earth. We ask this mighty blessing in the name of the risen Jesus. So again, a very big, warm welcome to you. I just love the Easter season. And for me, it's just been, well, I don't know even how to talk about it. It's critical. I don't know what we do without resurrection. I have many, many close friends who do not believe in God and do not believe in resurrection at all. And they think I'm crazy, and they're wonderful people. I don't know how you can go through life without resurrection. I remember when I was in college and I was always growing up thinking about death, which is my problem. It's always been my stumbling block. And I thought, well, when I was in college, I thought one day, well, when I die, I believe I'm going to go and meet God. I'm going to be overwhelmed by love and light and peace. And I'm going to meet Jesus, and he's going to be risen, and he's going to be great and happy and loving and peaceful and joyful and welcoming. And he's going to say, and what did you do with your gift of life, with your time on earth? And that question got through to me, and I began to think, well, I better do something so I can be ready to meet Jesus. And it's really challenged me to become a priest and a Jesuit and to work for peace and justice. I say all that because two very close friends of mine died this week. And, it just seems so many people are dying these days. One was Richard Dietz, my friend at the Fellowship of Reconciliation, who was very close with Martin King and Coretta Scott King, and who worked all over the world to teach nonviolence through the Fellowship of Reconciliation. He was just amazing. He should be world famous. My other friend was Ramsey Clark, who died last night. He was the former Attorney General under Kennedy and Johnson. And so I'm very good friends of mine with Daniel Berrigan, and for 35 years, and we used to have dinner every 3 months together for many years. And he was my lawyer during my Plowshares trial and many other trials. And I think of them now being welcomed by the risen Jesus into paradise, and they're telling him about their big lives. But that's about as far as I've got. So that's why I like to reflect on Easter and resurrection with you, because it's a mystery. And yet, we don't have that much to go on about it in the Gospels. There's just, really, John has a lot, but Mark, he doesn't rise from the dead in the Gospel of Mark. If you read the fine print, verses 16 verses 1 to 9, it just says there's an empty tomb and the women run away because the angel said, he'll meet you all back in Galilee. And Mark is saying, if you want to meet the risen Jesus, you got to start your own journey from Galilee to Jerusalem, which is why they're terrified. It's amazing. So brilliant writing. And anyway, Luke has this great big story of the road to Emmaus, and that's what I thought we could look at today. Here's basically kind of what I think that, my thesis, if we're looking at Jesus from the perspective of Gandhian nonviolence, Kingian nonviolence, that Gandhi said Jesus is the greatest person of nonviolence in history, that he taught the spectacular vision of nonviolence in the Sermon on the Mount, and that he practiced and preached meticulous nonviolence everywhere he went. And he marched to Jerusalem, and he resisted injustice and violence and empire. And he did civil disobedience at the temple, and he gave us the Eucharist. And what happened? What did we do to him? We arrested him, tortured him, killed him. And he comes back and he says to his friends, peace be with you, peace be with you, peace be with you. Now you go and walk the road of nonviolence and be a peacemaker to your own modern day Jerusalem. And wow, I find that very moving and challenging and life-giving. Let's get up and go. So that's what I want to reflect on today, the resurrection in light of the nonviolence that Gandhi and Dr. King taught. And I want to invite you today, this weekend, in the weeks ahead in Easter season, as we wait Pentecost, to really go and be with the risen Jesus and talk to him and listen to him and feel his presence and receive his resurrection gift of peace, and let him send you forth again to carry on his mission. Now, for those of you who know me, I always have questions. It's one of my major problems. And I have tons of questions, so I'm going to give them to you now, and I'm going to give them to you at the end if you want to write these down. But my thought is that you could sit with them and pray on them and reflect on them. So here's the first one. They're all very simple and therefore impossible. After all you've been through, after all our lives, here we are in the lockdown in the pandemic at this stage in your life today. What does resurrection mean for you? because it would probably have evolved over our life, or we've deepened and matured in it, or maybe we have more doubts than ever. Where are you with the question of the meaning of resurrection? Or to put it another way, what does the resurrection of the nonviolent Jesus mean for you? What's the connection between resurrection and nonviolence, which is what Gandhi insisted? So if Jesus is totally nonviolent and raised from the dead and alive and well, and you and I are his followers, what difference does it make in our lives? In other words, how are you and I living differently because of the resurrection of Jesus from those who don't believe in the resurrection of Jesus? What do you think about that? And in other words, how are you a witness of the risen Jesus, which is the big word that we're going to hear today? Let me see here for a second. Yeah, I think you're still all listening to me. I think we're still connected. After years in the Jesuits, I used to joke, well, if it were me and I was the savior of the world, let's ponder that. And I came down here and I explained everything perfectly to you. Here's how you love everyone, you make peace, nonviolence. I gave you this Sermon on the Mount. I healed everybody. I led a campaign to end the empire. And what did you do? You betrayed me, you denied me, you abandoned me, you arrested me, you tried me, you tortured me, and you executed me. And I went up to heaven and God said, I need you to go back there. I'd say, I'm not going back down there. There's no way. I don't know if you've ever thought about that. When I think about that, I'd be resentful for several thousand years, or at least I'd be really mad at Peter. How could you do this to me? And as I said to the other group recently, we get mad at the smallest, most ridiculous, most inconsequential things. We have so much resentment over such minor things. Jesus comes back, peace be with you, peace be with you, peace be with you. It's amazing. If Gandhi was right that he was the most nonviolent person in history, then his resurrection is probably best understood still from the perspective of nonviolence. And it means then that Jesus was totally nonviolent during his life. We killed him and he comes back and he's still totally nonviolent, infinitely gentle, infinitely compassionate, loving, forgiveness, not a trace of anger, not a drop of resentment or bitterness or revenge or retaliation. You see, this is really important to reflect on it this way. And that's why the gang changes. They realize they're all forgiven and they say, right, we're going to throw our whole lot in with this guy. And they all become martyrs. They gave their lives to carry on his campaign of nonviolence. And so where are we in that story? And it's a wonderful question. I don't know if my friend Bill Wiley Kellerman is on the call yet. And I can't see whether he's there or not, but he was supposed to be. Anyway, we are friends of Daniel Berrigan, and you may have heard that on May 8th, I'm doing a special Zoom for Dan's 100th birthday. And Bill has a new book out on Dan Berrigan. And so it's an amazing book. And Bill's going to respond to my reflections on Dan on May 8th. But I was telling Bill, of all the people I've known, I consider Daniel Berrigan maybe the greatest witness of the resurrection. He kind of lived resurrection. Our friend Peter is on this Zoom, and I think, Peter, you know what I mean. Just there's also his joy. There was a deep peace, and he loved to have a party with friends. That's the way I envision the risen Jesus. And that's how I want to live. We all want to be followers of the risen Jesus and be getting ready for resurrection, which means standing up against death. Well, in my book, Daniel Berrigan, Essential Writings, I end with a few texts that Dan wrote on resurrection, which I've always thought were the greatest writings on resurrection that I've ever read. So I'm going to read a long Dan Berrigan quote, which is part funny and part shocking. And it's in my book, Daniel Berrigan, Essential Writings, if you wanted to get it. I found this quote. There's only one copy of it, I think, in the whole planet, in a really obscure encyclopedia of writers, if you can imagine. It's called like the Autobiography Encyclopedia, and it's 40 volumes. And Dan, famous writers are asked to write about themselves for this encyclopedia. And Dan had one copy of it and he gave it to a Jesuit friend. And 36 years ago, I borrowed it for a while and I Xeroxed this. And that's where I found this quote. So that's a long introduction, but I want you to listen really carefully to Daniel Berrigan's take on the resurrection. So here goes. Once there was a dead man, a criminal, a subject of capital punishment, and lo, he refused to stay dead. He stood up as the authorities shortly came to sense this was an earthquake in nature, in the nature of law and order, in the nature of death, in the nature of war. For in the nature of things as defined by the nation state, a great one for deciding what the nature of things is, dead men stay dead. The word from Big Brother, the word that gives him clout, inspires fear is a criminal once disposed of stays disposed. Not at all. Along come these crazies shouting in public, our guy's not dead. He's risen. Isn't that great? Now, I submit, this is Daniel Berrigan, you can't have such a word going around and still run the state properly. The first nonviolent revolution was, of course, the resurrection. The event had to include death as its first act, and also the command to Peter, put up your sword, so that it might be clear once and for all that Christians suffer death rather than inflict it. Christians suffer death rather than inflict it. All worldly systems and arrangements are bypassed by the resurrection. If from now on death has no hold over people, in the sense that they're now exorcised from their fear of death, then what's left worth fearing or worth hoping from any worldly structure? All the worldly structures from now on to serve the feisty appellation conferred on them by Dorothy Day, the filthy, rotten system. Everything is part of the filthy, rotten system, Dorothy Day said. Here's Dana. I take it she was referring to their main function, multiplying the metaphors and means of death. The end of such a world, as she realized and regarded it, was not only near. The end of the culture of death, the power of death, has already occurred. Isn't that fantastic, everybody? Bill Wiley Kellerman, isn't that great? I'm reading Dan. I was talking about you before you came on here. That's my favorite quote on the resurrection. And it's in my book, Daniel Berrigan, Essential Writings. Along come these crazies shouting, our guy's not dead. You can't run this state with somebody running around saying that. That's where we are. So I want to sum up Dan's take on the resurrection. This is the basis for all of Dan's peacemaking life, was the resurrection, the resurrection. So if the crucifixion, the execution of Jesus by the Roman Empire was totally legal, then the resurrection of the nonviolent Jesus is totally illegal. And it's the greatest act of civil disobedience in history. And Dan says the most perfect nonviolent revolution in history. So this is really important to think on. The only power the empire has over us as peacemakers, that has over Gandhi and Dorothy Day and Dr. King and Oscar Romero and all our saints, is the power of death. They can kill us, Or as Dan says, the metaphors and means of death. They can arrest us and they can put us in jail. But Dan says Jesus has taken the power of death away from now on. So we have nothing to fear from now on. We go on in total hope and peace and trust and nonviolence, and we keep speaking out against the empire and war and nukes and injustice and calling for a new culture of justice and disarmament and peace. That's my take on the resurrection story. Dan would say that the whole human race is addicted to violence and death. But when you reflect on the story of the resurrection of Jesus from a Gandhian Kingian hermeneutic of nonviolence, and this is my own thinking, my own having done the math after listening to Dan for 40 years. He never said this, but this was my conclusion from listening to him. This is my definition of resurrection. So Bill Kellerman, buckle your seatbelts. I want to know if you agree with me later. Resurrection means having nothing to do with death. Resurrection means then not having a trace of violence within you. Resurrection means then total nonviolence, the fullness of life. So, which means as followers of the risen nonviolent Jesus, as people getting ready for resurrection, we're trying not to have a drop of violence in us, but to be instead totally nonviolent, totally peaceful, full of compassion and love and life, and resisting the state and all those who inflict death on our sisters and brothers. So we want to share the resurrection of the nonviolent Jesus. We've got to keep renouncing violence within us and being totally nonviolent, but working for nonviolent, but be working for a new nonviolent world. Now, if you don't like that, here's another way to put it. The resurrection of the nonviolent Jesus for us, his followers, means buckle your seatbelts. Our survival is already guaranteed. Do we really believe that? That's what Gandhi wrestled with. And that's why Gandhi in 1903 professed a vow of fearlessness, never to be afraid for 1 second for the rest of his life, because he was a follower of the risen nonviolent Jesus. So we can go forward and we can resist death and the culture of death and live life to the full and keep speaking out. And they can do whatever they want with us. They can even arrest us and jail us or kill us like Dr. King and Gandhi and Romero. But we know our survival is already guaranteed. We are resurrection people. And one day we're going to be with the risen Jesus and all our relatives and all the saints and all the peacemakers. So we're going to just get on with the work that Jesus has for us now. Okay, all that's my preliminary stuff for Luke 24. I hope that was helpful. That's kind of where I'm coming from and about the best I've thought of after 40 years of thinking about resurrection and nonviolence. So I'm going to read to you the story of Luke 24. So I invite you to sit back and listen carefully, or you can read along. I'm going to get to the end of the meal, and then I'll talk about it. And then I'm going to read the appearance in the upper room, the rest of Luke 24, talk about that, and then we'll open it up for questions and comments and reflections and rebuttal if necessary. Okay, so this is the Gospel, Luke chapter 24, verse 1. At daybreak, on the first day of the week, they took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. And they found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were puzzling over this, behold, two men in dazzling garments appeared to them. They were terrified and bowed their faces to the ground, but they said to them, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, but he has been raised. Remember what he said to you while he was still in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be handed over to sinners and be crucified, and rise on the third day." And they remembered his words. Then they returned from the tomb and announced all these things to the 11 and to all the others. The women were Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Mary, the mother of James. The others who accompanied them were also told this to the apostles, but their story seemed like nonsense, and they did not believe them. But Peter got up and ran to the tomb and bent down and saw the burial cloths, and he went home amazed at what happened. Okay. Now that very day, 2 of them were going to a village 7 miles from Jerusalem called Emmaus, and they were conversing about all the things that had occurred. And it happened that while they were conversing and debating, Jesus himself drew near and walked with them, but their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. And he asked them, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" They stopped, looking downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, said to him in reply, "Are you the only visitor to Jerusalem who does not know of the things that have taken place there in these days?" And he replied to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "The things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene, who is a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people, how our chief priests and rulers both handed him over to a sentence of death and crucified him. We had hoped that he would be the one to redeem Israel. Besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since this took place, and some women from our group, however, have astounded us. They were at the tomb early this morning and did not find his body. And they came back and reported that they indeed seen a vision of angels who announced that he was alive. Then some of those with us went to the tomb and found things just as the women had described, but him they did not see." And he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets spoke. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all the scriptures. As they approached the village, he gave the impression that he was going on further, but they urged him, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening and the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. And it happened that while he was at table with them, he took bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. And with that, their eyes were opened and they recognized him, but he vanished from their sight. And they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the scriptures to us?" So they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem, where they found gathered together the 11 and those with them who were saying, "The Lord has been truly raised and has appeared to Simon." Then the 2 recounted what had taken place on the way and how he was made known to them and the breaking of the bread. It's such a beautiful story. So I just kind of want to walk through it with you and just point out a few things for your reflection. And then I'll read the rest of the story and then talk about that. It's the famous road to Emmaus, which we've heard all our lives, but I don't think you can ever hear enough. And wherever we are at this point in our lives, I guess my question for you is, where are you in the story? How is the road to Emmaus your story? So there they are, these 2 crestfallen disciples who, by the way, I think were his aunt and uncle, but that's another story. Cleopas is referred to, and they're both referred to later on in other places in the New Testament. But they're leaving Jerusalem, which means they're walking down the road from the city after Jesus's horrific torture and execution, and they're afraid, and they're grief-stricken, and they're all confused, but they're totally depressed, and they're going to the village, and that means they're leaving the community. They're giving up, which means they're walking in total despair. That's the key for me to understand the story. And Jesus sidles up to them, but they don't recognize him. He's risen from the dead, but they don't see that it's him. And he asks them so gently, it's just an amazing question. What are you discussing as you walk along? And they stop. Like, are you kidding me? Are you the only person in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened there in the last few days? And the risen Jesus asked one of the most astonishing questions in the entire Bible and in the history of the world. Did you notice it? What things? What things? It's just utterly amazing to me. 20 years ago, I wrote a whole book called The Questions of Jesus. And, you know, if you add up all the four Gospels, he asks about, I don't remember the exact number, it's like 350 questions. And only 2 of them does he answer. The question is just left there. And I wrote a whole book on the questions, and you can get it on Amazon or Doubleday. But this is my favorite question, because I invite you to think about it. You know, if it were me, that's why I keep saying, what would you do if I were arrested and tortured and killed, and then I died, and I went to heaven, and then I came back, and I rose from the dead, and I appeared to my friends. I go, you see how I am. I'd go, you wouldn't believe just what happened to me. They killed me, and then I went up to heaven, and now I've come back, and I'm alive. I'd be talking nonstop, as you all know about me. But Jesus responds, what things? What things? This is a very powerful instruction. And it's a glimpse into who our risen, nonviolent Jesus is. How humble he is, and peaceful, and mindful, and centered, nonviolent. It's a glimpse of resurrection. This is very, very important, I think, because he didn't have to talk like that. He wants us to do the talking, and he wants to listen to us. And he's trying to help us express our feelings through all that's happened to him. But he never overwhelms us or imposes himself on us like I do, like we do. He's much more gentle. Here's the catch, I think, and you can reflect on this and tell me if I'm wrong, but he wants us to tell him his story in our lives. He wants to hear our experience of him in our lives. Tell me about me in your life. Something like that, which is very disarming and very healing. We get to tell him about our experience of the Paschal mystery, of him, his presence in our lives, to share our journey, and he's right there with us. So they launch into the whole thing. You would not believe what happened. He was arrested, tortured, crushed, defeated, executed, and now it's all over and there's no more hope and Jesus is gone. And this is the second big point I wanted to share with you about this. I think this is in my book, Jesus the Rebel. This is a test of your verb tenses, Bill Kellerman and everybody. The past pluperfect. The past pluperfect. It's a critical detail in the Road to Emmaus story. I submit. The 2 downcast disciples say to the original, in the original Greek, to the risen Jesus, in the verb tense, the past pluperfect, we had hope. We had hoped. We had hoped things were going to get better. We had hoped things would change. We had hoped he would be the one. And we had hoped war and killing and empire would end. We had hoped justice would finally be done for the poor, that humanity would live in peace and care for the poor, protect creation. We had hoped he would lead us to peace. We had hoped, but we were wrong. Once we had hope, but now we have none, because there is no hope. This is really important. This is the climax of the entire Gospel of Luke. And they say to the risen Jesus, we had hoped, but now we know there is no hope. This is total rock bottom despair, the despair of no hope whatsoever, the climax of the story. There is no hope. Our best hope was killed, so all hope is gone. I think that if you want to go deep into the mystery of resurrection, you want to experience the risen Jesus, if you want to experience the resurrection of the saints and our friends and relatives, you have to go deep into that place within where you have given up all hope and sit there and tell the risen Jesus about it. Tell him there's no hope, not for ourselves or our loved ones or the country or the world or even for Mother Earth now. So if we want to taste the hope of resurrection, perhaps we need to recognize and name our despair and tell him so he can work with us. Because that's probably deep down in the basement of our hearts, still some lingering despair. And he's come to turn the tables over our despair. I don't know about you, but like me, I've certainly used the past Blue Perfect many times, or maybe it's even running subconsciously in my mind. Are you the only person, Jesus, who doesn't see the things that are happening in the world? I mean, just look. Permanent warfare, Donald Trump, Yemen, Syria, Palestine, the death of my friends this week. We've got thousands of nuclear weapons on air trigger alert. We're digging up fossil fuels all over the place and hastening climate change. Our country is stealing resources all over the world. We beat and kill unarmed African-American men like George Floyd. 4 billion people live under $2 a day. We're just destroying each other and the whole planet. Few people care about your way of peace and love, Jesus, or whoever you are, much less nonviolence as a social methodology for change. You inspired us to try to do something, but now we know nothing can be done. We had hoped. We had hoped your reign of peace would break through. We had hoped you would do something or get us to do something. We think you're a very nice guy, Jesus, but now we know there is no hope. I'm trying to articulate for us the sense of despair living in a world of total death. And I think we have to open our eyes and name it and look at it. At least that's what I say my friend Daniel Berrigan did. If we want to experience the risen Jesus, or better yet, practice resurrection. Why? Because the risen Jesus doesn't buy it for a second. Absolutely not. He always is in your face. And he challenges our despair. This is powerful. How foolish you are. He's not putting you down. He's going, come on, man. How slow you are to believe. I mean, even look at all the prophets. You didn't believe Isaiah or Jeremiah or Gandhi or Dorothy Day or Dr. King. Don't you get the story by now? Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and enter into his glory? That's a tough sentence for me. Was it not necessary? Necessary that our guy should be so brutally tortured and killed? Well, in a world of torture and death, he sides with all the victims of death and is raising all of us. You could say, well, what difference did it make? The world is so full of injustice and violence and war. Now we're in the verge of catastrophic climate change. We've never experienced this before. Like the whole world is going to be destroyed and the number of wars will be permanent and so forth. And so, and meanwhile, the church is a mess. It continues to bless and justify war. No, it seems like things are worse. No, it was not necessary that the Messiah should suffer so terribly. But see, that's when we are naming, we are exposing the fact that we don't believe in nonviolence. That we still somehow want a domineering or violent Messiah. Deep down, if you say, it wasn't necessary, there was a better way, then we haven't understood nonviolence. So the death of Martin Luther King has led to so much more around the world. This is a conversation I've had with all of King's friends, including Jim Lawson recently. It led to so many more things, martyrdom leads to bears good fruit. So Jesus refuses to cooperate with our despair. That's why I'm suggesting you go and you name your despair and tell him your despair. Because he's the embodiment of hope. He's beyond hope. And all the social and economic and political implications of hope. He's crucified and now he's alive. And it's like he starts all over with these two close friends of his, these two disciples. And he goes back to the basics of the salvation story. Okay, goes to the scriptures. Okay, there was Moses, and then there were the prophets and the Psalms, and they all pointed to me. And he's explaining the lineage, the biblical path of nonviolence leading up to him, the fullness of the God of peace. And he's showing that the Paschal mystery is redemptive, or as Martin Luther King said, unearned suffering love is always redemptive. That his suffering nonviolent love is going to win over every human heart in history and disarm us all. So he's saying, the way I translate what he says to Cleopas and his wife, I believe, his friends, is Christ has not failed. The empire is falling. Death has lost its power. The culture of violence is coming to an end. War is over if you want it, as John Lennon said. The old world is falling away. My way of nonviolence works, and it can be a tool for nonviolent revolution and nonviolent transformation for a more nonviolent world, if you dare believe and go forth and use it. Even creation's going to be renewed. Suffering accepted in love in pursuit of truth and justice in the global struggle bears immeasurable pursuit if only you believe and go for it for the long haul. Or as Dr. King said, quoting the great poet, truth crushed to earth will rise again. Isn't that wonderful? But so to carry on what he said to the disciples, I think when he explains the movement of God through the scriptures up to himself, today we can continue to explain that story of the lineage from the early church and how the gang got into the nonviolence movement and helped bring down the empire, to the desert fathers and mothers, once Constantine converted, who kept nonviolence alive, to then the monastic movements, which were very important, to then Francis and Clare and the Franciscan movement, which I think by bringing nonviolence back alive helped end feudalism, to then all the movements from the abolitionists and the suffragists, the labor movement, to Gandhi, and Gandhi's incredible effect on the human race, showing the power of nonviolence to bring down the British Empire nonviolently. Dr. King and the civil rights movement, then to everybody, Dorothy Day, the women's movement, the environmental movement, the anti-apartheid movement, all the nonviolent movements that brought down the Berlin Wall and the Soviet Union, there's thousands of them that continue to quietly change the world today, one movement at a time, right? What's happening right now in Myanmar, for example. This is the work of the risen Jesus and of his Holy Spirit. So the two disciples, when they hear all this, they're just gobsmacked. They're utterly astonished. So they say, come on in and have a meal. And he takes the bread and blesses it and breaks it and shares it. And they recognize him. And I remember somebody telling me that that's why they recognize him, because that's what their friend always did every day they were with him. At every meal, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and shared. That was his way. And now we know it as the Eucharist. And they say, were not our hearts burning as he opened the scriptures? That's another great question to sit with. What makes your heart burn as you hear this gospel story and read the scriptures and reflect on the lineage of Jesus up through today and Dr. King and Dorothy Day and Gandhi? So they immediately get up and set back to Jerusalem, and the road of despair becomes the road to hope. I love that. The road from violence's apparent victory turns around and becomes now the road of daring act of nonviolence. They go back to the scene of crime. The road of fear becomes the road of fearlessness and universal nonviolent love. They're going to take the message to the streets. The road of death turns around and becomes the road of new life, the road of resurrection. I just love all this. So my question is, when did Jesus sidle up to you? When have you had those moments in your life that you've realized that you're in the presence of the risen Jesus? You know, a lot of preachers talk about how he comes to us these days as a stranger, a refugee, an immigrant, an outcast, a homeless person, a prisoner, a sick person, a dying person. I would especially say in the movements for peace and justice. When was the last time you felt your heart burning? What makes you turn around from despair and fill you with hope and send you back to join the struggle? So now I'll read the conclusion of the story and make a few comments about it. If you're still all there with me, everybody, this is the end of chapter 24. While they were still speaking about this, he stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." They were startled and terrified and thought they were seeing a ghost. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled? Why do these questions arise in your hearts? Look at my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see, because a ghost does not have flesh and bones as you see I have." And as he said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While they were still incredulous for joy and were amazed, he asked them, "Have you anything here to eat?" And they gave him a piece of baked fish. He took it and ate it in front of them. And he said to them, "These are my words that I spoke to you while I was still with you, that everything written about me in the law of Moses and in the prophets and in the Psalms must be fulfilled." And he opened their minds to understand the scriptures. And he said to them, "Thus it is written that the Messiah would suffer and rise from the dead on the third day, and that repentance for the forgiveness of sins would be preached in his name to all the nations, beginning from Jerusalem. You are witnesses of these things." Wow, I just love all that. Isn't that great? So they arrive, they meet the community, they tell them they met Jesus on the road, and then he appears to them in their midst and says the famous greeting, the same thing he told them to say when he sent him out in Luke 10, "Peace be with you, peace be with you, peace be with you." And you notice he shows them his wounds. And later in John's gospel, he says, "Peace be with you," shows them the wounds and says, "Peace be with you" again. So I want to just make a few points here. The first thing I want to point out is that if you, and this sounds so simple, but it's only really hit me probably in the last 10 years. You and I really want to be resurrection people, followers of the risen Jesus. We really have to welcome and receive and accept and embrace his resurrection gift of peace. When he says, "Peace be with you," we have to say, "Okay, I'm going to take it. Thank you. I am going to live with your peace in my heart from now on, and not just till I die, but through eternity. No matter what happens, no matter what problems or crises we face, we're going to remain in the peace of Christ and stay peaceful and live in peace with the peacemaking Christ." I think very, very few people in history want his resurrection gift of peace. Or to put it even stronger, we've all rejected it, but it's still being offered to us so we can go back and accept it. I guess my question is, do you want it? How badly do you want to live in peace? That's, I've been talking about peace for 45 years, and you keep learning more and more and go deeper and deeper. What does accepting his resurrection gift of peace mean for you? I really invite you to think about that as like one of your goals for the rest of your life, to live in the gift of resurrection, which is a very, very deep peace. For me, that's why I've been helped so much by Thich Nhat Hanh, that Buddhism, as Merton said too, really can help you deepen in peace. Like nothing will trouble you. I'm going to keep referring to that, I think. Second, so this peace of resurrection is connected to the wounds. He says, peace be with you, and he shows us his wounds. So again, if you want to share in the peace of the risen Christ, we have to share in his wounds and the wounds of the nonviolent struggle for justice and peace. My friend Martin Sheen, when we got arrested last year with Jane Fonda at Fire Drill Fridays at the US Capitol, for his speech, he stood up and he told a story about somebody died and he appears at the gates of heaven and St. Peter's there and says, oh, welcome, show me your wounds. And the guy says, what do you mean, my wounds? And St. Peter says, was nothing worth struggling for? Was nothing worth suffering nonviolently for or dying for like the nonviolent Jesus? So in other words, what does the peace of Christ mean for you? And how is this resurrection peace connected to his wounds? It's like Bonhoeffer. This is not a cheap peace that we're talking about. It's a costly peace. I'm paraphrasing Bonhoeffer. Third, the other thing in the note in this little scenario is they're totally terrified, and we need to recognize that. Startled and then terrified. And I mean scared to death. So that's part of resurrection. As I said, coming to grips with our fears. But notice he asks a question. He's not scared. And he's like, what's your problem? It's me. Why are you troubled? And why do questions arise in your hearts? This is important. It's something about when we suddenly realize we are in the presence of God, we get scared and troubled and terrified. We have all these questions. And he says, Ronnie, why are you doing that? There's no reason to be troubled. So I think resurrection invites us to really spend time with our fears and to do our inner work and sit with our fears and give them to the risen Jesus and more let go of them. Why again, Gandhi professed a vow of fearlessness. He said, you can't practice nonviolence and be afraid. You and I don't have to be afraid anymore because our survival is already guaranteed. Our guy is not dead anymore. So there's nothing that should trouble us or disturb us. Now, Dan Bergen showed me that and told me that quietly in many little ways over 40 years. And he went to his death totally unafraid and totally at peace. And he never complained once. He was teaching me until the end. I'm just sharing with you about my teaching. I think there's a way to go forward in deep peace, in deep nonviolence, following the risen Jesus, so that these questions no longer arise. And I see that in Thich Nhat Hanh and other great peacemakers who just live in the present moment of peace. That's why mindfulness is a good practice. You can talk about, we can connect mindfulness and resurrection. I find that really helpful. Fourth, he opens the scriptures for them. In effect, what's so cool is that Jesus does a Bible study, and it's right there in the Gospel of Luke for the early church. It shows Jesus doing a Bible study for the early community, and it gives them courage to keep doing Bible studies and gospel studies. And he explains the movement of God in the scriptures and history and says, okay, now you continue the story. This is our story. But the point is repentance, forgiveness, and peace. All this happens so that repentance could be preached, which means we're going to turn everybody stuck in the culture of violence around into God's reign of nonviolence. Forgiveness. Every human being is going to forgive every person who ever hurt them. This is critical. Forgiveness comes up over and over throughout the Gospels. If you want to enter resurrection, you have to forgive every human being who ever hurt you. Let it all go. General amnesty. And peace, it means that we're going to get on and work for a whole new world without war or injustice or violence ever again. That means preaching to all the nations. And that's what you and I are trying to do. We're trying to be people who go out into the culture and say, turn from violence, turn toward nonviolence, forgive everyone, welcome the reign of peace on earth, and get with the resurrection program of active organizing grassroots movements of nonviolence. And that leads us, my fifth point, you are witnesses of these things. That's a great word. And as you know, the Gospel of Luke, or the writer of Luke, also writes the Acts of the Apostles, where the word witnesses of the resurrection appears many times. That's in effect the final commission here. Like many of you, I've been arrested many, many times. I've been arrested about 85 times in acts of civil disobedience against war, which means I've been in court over 200 or 250 times, often with Ramsey Clark, because you have to keep going back. And many times you have to take the witness stand, and they swear you in, and you have to say what you saw. I remember during the Plowshares trial, I said, I saw Philip Berrigan stand up for the whole human race and try to end war. The judge gave me contempt of court. You can't say that. I was a witness. So the word witness means a lot. It's a courtroom. Your whole life is you're living in a courtroom in the world, and you're testifying what you saw. I saw this happen. Jesus is risen in these movements. There is hope for peace and justice. So what does it mean for you to be a witness of the risen Jesus? How has your life been like you've been on a witness stand? It's not comfortable, but you have to tell the truth and tell what you saw. How do you do that today? What would that look like more and more for the rest of your life to see yourself as a witness? I'm testifying to the resurrection of Jesus. It's just lovely. So I'll conclude how I began, saying that resurrection means having nothing to do with death. I love that phrase. And so that means that you and I are going to try to non-cooperate with the culture of death from now on. That's why I always loved poet Edna St. Vincent Millay. Remember her from the 1920s? She has this incredible poem. I think it's called Civil Objector. And this is just the first line. I shall die, but that is all I shall do for death. I think that sums up our attitude for the rest of our lives. We will die, but we're not serving death anymore. We're people of resurrection. So I don't know if this has all been helpful, but I hope it has, that the story of Emmaus is our story too, and that hopefully we are turning around and going on the road of hope now back to the community to get on with the work. So let me ask you these questions one last time, then I'll open it up. What does resurrection mean for you? What does the resurrection of the nonviolent Jesus mean for you? What does it mean that death does not get the last word? That your survival is already guaranteed. What for you is the connection between resurrection and nonviolence? How have you used the past pluperfect? What had you hoped? We had hoped. And how are you moving beyond the past pluperfect toward hope? What makes you turn around? What makes your heart burn? What gives you new hope? Where are you encountering the risen Jesus today? And how are you going to go forth and be his witness, a witness of the resurrection? So, dear friends, thanks so much for your patience and for listening to me. I'm going to open it up now, if I can, to any questions and comments or reflections or rebuttal. Maybe I'll ask Ruth Ann if you can unmute yourself if you want to point out any question first, because I'm having.
They must all be
I
stunned.
can barely hear you.
Not getting anything. Can you hear me?
A little bit.
Oh, I don't have anything in the chat room except one from Patty Keene. Can you get into your chat room?
Yeah. I'm so close to leaving the church over Pope Francis. I had hoped that he would put an end to homophobia and discrimination against our LGBT sisters and brothers. I'm close to leaving the church. That's a great example, Patty, of being on the road to Emmaus. But just very briefly, Patty, our hope is not in Pope Francis. I can't see you, Patty. Or the institutional church. There you are. It's not. That's why I read, if you heard the quote from Jesus at the beginning, we're all barely getting to it. Our hope is in the risen Jesus. And your job, and I know you're not going to like anything I'm going to say, Patty, so I'm just going to come out and say it. So just brace yourself, is to be a witness of the resurrection, to go forth and tell Pope Francis and the institutional church they're wrong and to get their acts together. Now, hundreds of thousands of people around the world are doing that.
Yeah. And
On
I'm-
behalf of our LGBT sisters and brothers. And that's why there's resistance going on, because there's so much change happening. And the only way the change will happen is if everybody gets up and turns around Patty and he runs back to Jerusalem where the institutional church is still gathered and starts saying, hey, the resurrection means this, no more discrimination. And it means all the other stuff, no more poverty, no more executions, no more war, no more nuclear weapons. Are you kidding me? No more allowing, and on and on. Patty, this is a great question because it's another one of 1,000 ways we're called to be witnesses. Wherever your heart is burning, you can give up and walk away, Patty. But when you do that, you're doing that from the risen Jesus. And I know you probably don't want to do that. And, you know, I've been saying for 40 years, the only way change is going to come in the Catholic community is if you speak up and talk to your priests, bishops, archbishops, cardinals, and pope. I have done that all my life, and I would rather get arrested than go speak with a priest, a bishop, an archbishop, a cardinal, or a pope. And I can tell you chapter and verse of the hundreds and hundreds of priests and bishops I've talked to. And I had it out with, as Harry Guy knows, with Pope John Paul. And recently in Rome over Pope Francis. I don't want to do that. I'd much rather not do that. But you and I, Patty, have to. We have to be weird. That's what it means to be a witness for the resurrection. Or not, we can just say, no, I don't want to. I'm mad.
Can I ask you
Okay,
a
Patty,
question?
go ahead.
I have to ask you. a
Real
question.
loud, Patty.
I'm totally in line with that. And my question is if I stay, am I staying with an institution of violence?
Oh, that's a great question too. I didn't see where you're going with that. That's what you have to go and talk about with the risen Jesus. So I can't answer that question for you. Of course, I think everything has fallen. As Bill Kellerman and his friend William Stringfellow would say, we're living in the time of the fall, that, you know, all the institutions and all the communities and all the religions still espouse violence in various forms.
Right.
I made the decision to stay because of the saints that I've known, the Barragans.
Yeah.
But Patty, you know,
Yeah.
go and find, if there's a better Christian community for you to be with, then process that, discern that with Jesus. But the point is to still be a witness. Even if you do change the community that you're a part of, you should still be, seems to me, witnessing to the Pope and the Catholic bishops, because if they change, they will impact all the other Christian denominations around the world. That's why I'm working to get the Pope literally to write an encyclical on nonviolence.
Yeah.
The thinking is if it comes from the Pope, it's going to influence the whole world. Now, I say that because of all people, Robert Redford said, whom I know a little bit, when the Pope's Laudate Si came out, he told the New York Times it may have saved the planet.
Yeah.
Because if you remember, you won't remember the historical moment we were in. Congress, there was no way anything was going to happen. The Paris Accords were going to fall apart. Laudate Si came out. He came to the States and the whole world was kind of amazed. So it's just that the problem with the Catholic Church is just so darn big, you know, and it's got so many problems. But we need to help other Christians understand what the resurrection means, and that it means total nonviolence, which means, as you're bringing up, no discrimination to anybody. Those days are over. Well, we're in the throes of change, and it's exciting. And we can be angry and mad and walk away. I don't think the early community did that. I'm not really talking to you, Patty, here. I'm trying to say,
No, I hear you.
because one of the amazing things is they didn't give up. they kept going and they never were going to live to see all this great work that has been done. Things like that. I hope this makes sense. So I see there's one more question.
There's a couple more questions. Michelle Dunn should be next.
Michelle, can you unmute yourself and say
Yes,
hello to
hi,
me?
John. How are
Never
you?
call me. How you doing, Michelle? My friend in Washington, D.C.
It's wonderful to see you, and thanks for this wonderful teaching today. So I want to ask you to say more about fearlessness. About, you know, how we, it seems to me like it's a grace that we claim somehow, that we, you know, Jesus says, do not be afraid. How do we claim that grace of, you know, overcoming our fears of loss, of pain, of death, and how do we help others, you know, to do that as well?
Was there another question out there somewhere? Sorry, I'm just being silly. Thank you, Michelle. Yeah, you know, Michelle, and I've said this to you before, we got arrested with Jane, and it was a great day, right, Michelle? I mean, you know, it was a resurrection day. Hard to describe it, actually. It helps, Michelle, to have someone say to you, as I am now saying to Michelle and to all of you, here goes, buckle your seatbelts. I'm going to say it. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. The first day I met Daniel Berrigan, now we had been writing. I had entered the Jesuits, and as Harry knows well, he was a year ahead of me. The day I entered, I wrote Dan Berrigan a letter, and then finally I meet him. I met Kirkridge, and it was Friday night, and he gave a great talk, and we stayed up late. And I'm going, I'm a novice, and they won't let me get arrested, and I can't do this, and my family's mad at me, and I don't want to do that, and I can't do this. And Michelle, I'm complaining. And he's sitting there like Buddha, smiling, going, oh my God. And finally he says, what are you afraid of, John? Do not be afraid. Jesus says, don't be afraid. I mean, I was utterly disarmed when he said that to me, because first of all, no one had ever said that to me in my life. In fact, in my family, it was all about be afraid, be very afraid. Actually, that's why I was raised in fear. And he's also, part of the question was, what are you afraid of? So I started working on that, Michelle. If you're asking how to, and then, you know, I was getting ready, as you know, to profess a vow of nonviolence, because I saw Gandhi had professed 16 vows, and one of them was, oh my God, a vow of fearlessness. And I thought, well, I'll work on the vow of nonviolence for 50 years, and then I'll do that one. But no, I started working on fearlessness too. And I started making lists. I'm a big journaler, Michelle, and I make lists. Michelle, I invite you to go do that. Literally, but this was when I was 21 and 22. And then I made lists of everything I'm afraid of. Jan said, what are you afraid of? Well, I don't know what I'm afraid of. It took me a year to really think what I'm afraid of. I was 21. I was afraid of being made fun of. I was afraid of being put down. No, I'm afraid of getting kicked out of the Jesuits, or losing my job, or losing my relationships with my family and friends. No, I'm afraid of getting arrested or run over. I'm afraid of doctors, as Harry knows. I'm afraid of having heart surgery. No, I'm afraid of death. And I wrote out all the lists, and then I spent about 20 years praying over the list, Michelle. And then I started doing things about it. I started getting arrested with Dan Berrigan, so that when I was arrested with you, I mean, after 1983 to when we were arrested in 2018, it's like, great, bring it on. It's like, we had that was a great day. To going to work with the homeless, anything that was scary for me, the other side of town, among the poor. I remember the first time I flew to Georgia to meet my friend Billy on death row. That was so scary. I was all by myself. And He took me around and introduced me to everybody on death row. They're all dead now. I met every one of them. We had a wonderful day. They just let me be with the guys on death row for the whole day. You get over your fears after a while because they were such fabulous people. And Billy's my teacher now. They were teaching me. The homeless teach me. Then the people you meet doing peace and justice actions, Michelle, weren't they the best when we were with Fire Drill Fridays? And then I went to El Salvador, and that was really the turning point for me, really to be in the war zone. And I still have PTSD from that and all the places I've been since then. But that was the real turning point, getting to know the Jesuits were later assassinated. And that's why I did the Plowshares actions, because I thought, well, I've known people have been killed. I actually have known probably 100 people have been assassinated. I know one of the great women lawyers for the Catholics in Northern Ireland, Dan Berrigan, came over to see me in Belfast in 1988. I took him to meet her, and she was blown up a month later. She was fearless, but by the UDA. Anyway, I could go on, and I don't normally talk about it. But after a while, and I saw this with Dan Berrigan, and I saw him answer your question, Michelle, and I saw him say, you know, over time, the fear is not the issue for you anymore. You have other issues. But the key thing he said, which I'm neglecting here, is community. He said, like, if we went to Fire Drill Fridays with a lot of friends and you're really afraid, probably somebody in the Christian group is not going to be afraid, like I was that day. You know, they're going to be great spirits, as Jane Fonda was, and that's going to rub off on you. But then on their days where you're really afraid, you go to your community, your prayer group, your Pax Christi group, and you tell them, you share your fears with them, and somebody's going to say, oh, don't be afraid, I got your back. You know, that somebody in the community is in a really good space. And that's how together, Michelle, we're going to fake it till we make it. Does that help, or does that just make things worse?
Actually, it sounds like a plan.
Okay, it's a plan. But, you know, go to those passages, Michelle, and there's 15 of them, unfortunately for you, where Jesus says, do not be afraid. And let Jesus say, do not be afraid. And when I have a bad day, I go back to that. But I want to be in a place where he doesn't have to say that anymore. And he can just, you know, I can just be with him, and I can say, how are you doing, man? You know, try to cheer the poor guy up. That's always my strategy. It's just not really working. I'm going to start calling on people unless you have another question.
Peter Wise wants to talk to you.
Okay, Peter, and then I want to hear from Bill, Harry, my friends. Otherwise, anyway. Peter, is it Peter?
Yeah, Peter.
Okay, Peter, my friend.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, John.
Explain. Time for a rebuttal.
Yeah, it's not a rebuttal at all. Thank you for the wonderful, energetic, passionate. I just thought in Luke 24, I thought the whole drama is so interesting.
Yeah.
In the expectations of the community.
Wow.
Embodied in the word Messiah. You know, on Palm Sunday, coming in the gate opposite from, you know, the Roman governor coming in. And the expectations for them, I guess, the word Messiah to them was he's going to restore power, but not by peace, but by, you know, conquering the enemy, because we're an oppressed people and we've been waiting so long. So, you know, I thought it was interesting that a lot of the people had an expectation of a warlike, powerful Messiah. I think that was embedded in the word Messiah, but he was so countercultural to that. So that, I think, is part of the explanation why people were, you know, had lost hope, were so downtrodden. I mean, this guy was supposed to save us, and look what happened to him. Another separate piece from that, it's so interesting in this reading, is the first evangelists of the risen Jesus were women. They were all women. The guys went away and they're in hiding, but it's the women who come forth. And I just find that so heartening. And, you know, a continued basis for frustration with the church and how they continue to treat women. And just, I don't want to talk too much here because there's a lot of people. I think of the remarkable things that are happening with people dying with Ramsey Clark and Richard Dietz also was the theologian Hans Küng, the great
Hans Küng.
German, yeah, who had tried his whole life to bring Reformation.
Yeah.
Another Reformation, a German bringing another Reformation, as difficult as it was. But then the last thing is the other confluence of events this week was the sentencing of the last person of Kings Bay Plowshares in Brunswick, Georgia. Mark Colville was the last of the 7 to be sentenced. That was just yesterday. And for anybody who wants to read a really profound statement against the Trident submarines and the world of violence, his pre-sentencing statement, which you can find by Googling, Plowshare 7, Kings Bay, Georgia, Tridents, is just a wonderful statement on his part of this, as you were saying earlier, John, this violence-filled world. And then that leads to, the loss of hope and what do we do with this and what can we do and everything else you're talking about. But it's a wonderful statement by, and part of that, by his, before the sentencing, they had also what they call a celebration of hope, I think. And Liz McAllister read a prayer for that. So Liz is still, she's aging and becoming someone, more infirm, I should say. But she's still with us and still with the cause. I'll stop because there's a lot of people.
Well, that's wonderful. Thank you for sharing all that, Peter. That's really great. I want to say a few things about everything you said because it was all so provocative. What a great question. What were their expectations? It makes me think, what's our expectations of Jesus or the church? We heard that from Patty. But what's even our expectations of Jesus? He was going to be a totally nonviolent Messiah, and they just couldn't grasp that. I think ours are different now, but I don't know. I hadn't thought of it that way. Like, I would say, I guess on paper, correctly, I don't know if it's how I feel, but he would say, we should expect that the Spirit would live in us to carry on his gospel work of peace and justice in our own lives as resurrection people and help change the world. So that's the expected. I don't really expect Jesus to appear today in Washington, D.C. or Jerusalem. Or if I have to go with that language, I think he's appearing all over the place, in the poor and on the border and so forth and so on. But we have to be witnesses and go forth. I like that word, witnesses. And that's what the Kings Bay Plowshares are, witnesses of resurrection in the face of the Trident submarine, which is the ultimate symbol of death on the planet. Each one of those has hundreds and hundreds of Hiroshima bombs. I think there's 19 of them floating around the planet. It's incredible, like this doomsday machine. Thank you for bringing up the women, of course. I just did a Zoom on that the other day, and that's why I didn't focus on it too much. That the women are the first witnesses of the resurrection. And Patty, wherever you are, if you're still here, and Michelle, sorry, but you holy apostles and women who are witnesses of the resurrection, and Emily and Lee, you've got to go tell us men, churchmen, this is the community that Jesus is risen, because we haven't been listening for 2,000 years. That's what Peter's saying. And it's still part of your vocation and all of our vocations to announce the resurrection. That's great. Anyway, thank you, Peter, for sharing that. I'm wondering if anybody else has a thought, and I wanted to ask if Bill in particular wanted to say anything. My friend Bill Wiley-Kellerman, who's going to speak with me on May 8th when I do the Zoom program for Dan's 100th workshop. If you want to unmute yourself there, Bill.
Well, I have a lot stirred up in me by the conversation, the things that you shared at the beginning. I could do some scattershot thoughts about that. One on fear, I think the do not be afraid admonition from Jesus is so often to community and addressing a community not to be in fear. And I also think about how in discernment, often is not in preparing for an action, confessing our fears to one another, getting them out on the table is really important. And so often the very things we're afraid of is the things we're being called to. And when we confess to them, they become actually in the service of the Holy Spirit. And we become freed of them, I think, as you suggest. Kept inside, they rule us. I think it's important to name them, confess them to one another in order to claim the admonition not to be afraid together. I do like your definition of resurrection and share it. I think it's one that both Dan and Bill Stringfellow shared together. I was thinking about Bill testifying at the Catonsville 9.
Yeah.
That's such a great, Bill's remembrance of it is like a paragraph long, where he says, remember the state has only one power over you, and that's to kill you. They can execute you, exile you, imprison you. All those mean the same thing. It's the state can consign you to death. And the good news of the gospel, good news of the resurrection is that death fails. You have nothing to fear. Dan's remembrance of that was one line. He said, Stringfellow got said, death shall have no dominion.
Yeah.
And he sat down. But those are, I think, totally compatible memories and totally in line with your definition of resurrection, of having nothing to do with death. I was thinking how both of them share that with St. Paul as well. You know, in Colossians, second chapter of Colossians, Paul says that it's the cross, it's the crucifixion that exposes that death is all they've got. You know, they're made a spectacle before the world, that all they've got, all they're running on, all their authority is based on death, and that's exposed and triumphed over in the cross. In Corinthians, he says it's the resurrection that defeats the powers in the 15th chapter, where he lifts up the resurrection for the meaning of the community, and it has to do with the powers being put under the authority of Jesus. Anyway, I so appreciated the conversation and your remarks at the beginning, unpacking the passages. I could reflect on those further myself, but anyway, I'm just so grateful. Thanks for the conversation.
Good. So I hope that's what you see why I called on Bill, everybody. He's one of our great teachers. He's a student and friend of William Stringfellow and wrote the anthology of all Stringfellow's writings. I hope you all get it. Dan Berrigan's great friend, and he's just publishing next week this fantastic book of essays on Dan. And Bill took a class with Dan just after Dan got out of prison at Union Seminary in 1973, I think.
Yeah.
So 100 years ago. Anyway, the book is called Celebrant's Flame, and I want you to all Google it and get it. But Bill, by the way, I never heard from a publisher about the secret code to how to get it cheaply. Want to tell us?
Say it again.
That secret code thing you were telling me about, how people can get.
Yeah, I think John's going to send that out. I don't have it at my fingertips, but in the next couple of days,
no, Monday,
got a code for 40% off the.
Yeah, so you're all going to get this offer. You can get the book, but Bill, tell her I haven't gotten it. And I was going to send out the e-blast on Monday. Sorry, I'm talking shop here, as my dad said.
Okay, I'll get that to you.
Okay,
Yeah.
Another question or comment or two, if anybody. Ruth Ann, is there anybody, any other comments or questions?
Sure, there's always something. There was one here from Jean Paul, and then Lainey had something to say. If you can get on your chat and take a look.
Okay, this is from Lainey. If we truly live in love for our neighbor, forgive and say, peace as Jesus, peace be the love that St. Paul wrote about that does not keep a record of wrong. She's writing, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Do you think we are ready to change how we teach nonviolence, the two hands of nonviolence, to extend both hands open in love? Lainey, can you wave your hand? Because I don't think I know you. Who's that? Oh, hi, Lainey. Interesting. You got that from Ken Budigan and Pache Bene, right? The two hands of nonviolence thing?
Yeah, and reading Barbara Deming and just reading a lot about nonviolence. And
Right.
the spirit kind of laid on me a while ago of like, let's try to not be like we're better than everybody and bring that stop hand down and just be loving. And if we truly forgive.
I hope everybody knows what Lanny's talking about, and that's originally from Barbara Deming, the great activist from the 60s, who says when she was doing nonviolence workshops, she would do this exercise, which my friend Ken Budigan and Pache Bene does to this day. He's probably off doing it somewhere right now. The two hands like this. One hand saying no to your violence. I'm resisting your violence, and the other hand outstretched. Let's be friends. We're human with each other. And Lanny is saying, can't we just use two hands? I agree with you, Lanny. And I have never once in my life and thousands of talks ever used the two hands approach. It doesn't work for me. We do want to stop, but I found that doesn't work actually when you're faced with someone who wants to hurt you. I'm thinking about a lot of jailers I faced, or when I was in El Salvador, the death squads had the machine gun. If I put a hand up, that would not have been wise. So you put both hands out, hey, how you doing? They think you're crazy. And you get disarmed and everything goes well. That's my methodology of nonviolence, Emily. But anyway, it's a deep question. And what does resurrection mean? How do we move more and more to fearlessness, openness? I'm sure it's a very Buddhist angle on it too, because Thich Nhat Hanh would talk about open hands. That's very rich to think about and pray on. Can I ask if any other my other friends, Harry, do you
Emily wants to ask something. Emily,
please explain it all to us.
Oh, no. I just wanted to say that, coming, out of Pax Christi at Fordham and then New Mexico, and I very action oriented, and then becoming a mom, and then certainly with COVID, had to turn that around and be like, here I am, much more of a contemplative sort of angle, reading a lot, as you mentioned, Thich Nhat Hanh, learning from Richard Rohr and the CAC, contemplation and action. I feel like I'm at a point now where I'm trying to integrate contemplation and action at a deeper level. Like I was really action, then I was really contemplation, and now I'm really feeling like integrate. And you had touched briefly on something about the connection between mindfulness and resurrection.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit more about your thoughts about that? Because that's my, I go round and round in my head, and maybe I should just drop down into my heart about it.
That's great. Thank you, Emily. So Emily's my friend from New Mexico and lives down on the border of Mexico, but was part of our Los Alamos witness for years. I think that all sounds a great journey because you want to integrate the contemplative life and nonviolent action. And there's also speaking, Emily. So there's contemplative nonviolence, there's active nonviolence, there's prophetic nonviolence. I actually think there's eschatological nonviolence, living in the kingdom of God from now on. All these things are great. Don't get too caught up in the trap of, to be a contemplative, you can't do any of this public organizing you've been doing, or to be an organizer, You can totally have a contemplative practice. I know people who are really busy, and I'll name drop. Mahatma Gandhi was one of them. I didn't know him, but I'm not that old, Emily. But he prayed 2 hours a day. An hour at 4 a.m. in the morning, an hour at 5 o'clock in the evening, every day for the last 45 years of his life. He was a busy guy. So he had a real rich contemplative practice going on. But, you know, I met Thich Nhat Hanh, you know, in the early 1990s, and then being the head of FOR and Daniel Berrigan's friend, I became a really good friend of his and saw him in France just before he got very, very sick. And so I've known him and he's written and stuff. And I began studying him more because when I can read all of that stuff, which is all fine and good, but to meet the guy was a different kettle of fish. And he had a lot to say to me because he knew me through Dan, and I was a Jesuit, and I was the head of that Fellowship of Reconciliation. Emily, I was quite shocked because he really is like that. Now, the way I always tell it, and I hope you don't mind me telling everybody, talking for a minute about great Buddhist leader, because I am a student of his in learning about resurrection life, or how do I live at peace? How do I make peace with myself? I'm an activist, but I struggle with inner peace and inner nonviolence. Well, anyway, he should be crazy, Emily. He knew 1,000 people by name killed in the Vietnam War. Did you know that, Emily? No. His brother was killed in like 67 or 65, and he got in bed for 3 months, which is what you do in Southeast Asia, is you don't see a psychiatrist, you don't have a community, there's no the Jewish practices, and so you just take to your bed. But then there were so many people, and so he was teaching mindfulness, he was practicing it, and he was a political activist, but he went really, really deep in the present moment of peace, and then he started writing those books. So when I was with him and I would see him, and he was always very, very like that. So I said that because I've been thinking about it for 30 years, and I haven't written that much about it, a little bit. Connection between mindfulness and resurrection peace. So Thich Nhat Hanh is saying that one way to unpack the insanity of the world's violence is that we are all mindless. We are running around like chickens with their heads cut off. And so we kill everybody. If you're mindful, those of you in my Lenten class, you remember, you know that you're the beloved Son of God. You know that you live in peace. You live in relationship with the nonviolent Jesus. And for Thai, the journey is every moment be centered in the present moment. Well, to do that, you return to your breath. Just notice that you're breathing. And that gets you out of your head, Emily, especially for me at night. I've been years, I was telling somebody yesterday, I've been years training myself. My mind would race at night. And after 50 years of working on it, it doesn't so much. You can make progress on slowing down. And it's all to do with the breath. But I'm saying the present moment is the resurrection gift of peace. It's only in the present moment that the risen Jesus is sitting here with me and with you all right now. And why would I want to be dwelling over what happened yesterday or worried about tomorrow when I got the risen Jesus here and now? And then I had this conversation with Thich Nhat Hanh, as I've told some of you before. He goes, John, I've spent my whole life trying to teach people everything about Jesus and the resurrection, the kingdom of God. And I said, I know that. I've been trying to get Catholics to be good Buddhists and be nonviolent and mindful. We all laughed and had a couple. So I think, Emily, everything you see Thich Nhat Hanh saying is in the four Gospels. The Gospels are actually much bigger, in my opinion, than Buddhist psychology and the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh. By the way, also don't forget to study Pema Chodron, Emily. She's fabulous. Yeah, she's really critical. She goes at it a different angle. But what I think is that all these teachings on mindfulness, compassion, letting go, which is the Christian word kenosis, and emptiness, the present moment, all of it is about living in resurrection peace. Now, isn't that wonderful, Emily? Now, I bet you Bill would agree with me, especially Bill in the last 25 years of Dan's life, Dan Berrigan mellow out a lot more, move more and more consciously to learn from Buddhism. Thomas Merton was going to try to do. And he became much more peaceful, even as he was still speaking out against the Iraq war and Afghanistan and all of that. And when he went to his death, wow, Emily, Dan was like Thich Nhat Hanh. And I told Thich Nhat Hanh that, and he cried. I'm telling you some personal stuff here, but so Emily, what I also am trying to tell you is that for me, I'm still learning. The journey's still continuing for me too, like for you. And there's more, and it gets better. And as you start connecting these things, like, you mean mindfulness is connected to resurrection, is connected to compassion, is all about nonviolence. And by the way, we still have to close Los Alamos, but you can be joyful and peaceful at the same time and still politically aware. Now we're getting somewhere, Emily. This is resurrection. So tell me what you think about what I just said. Any reaction? You can unmute yourself.
Oh, the phone is ringing. The idea of
You saved by the
that's
bell.
okay. I'm ignoring it. So I'm hearing what you're saying about kenosis as the resurrection piece, because the contemplative Christian prayer group of which I'm a part, and you know, we've been looking at and trying to experience that kenosis when we, you know, do the centering prayer. That I feel that what you're talking about in my heart about, yeah, that makes sense. I think I was trying to understand it like there, yeah, like you can't really come at it cerebrally, but now I know I totally know what you're talking about. Yeah, that makes
And
sense.
Emily, the last thing I'd want to tell you is I hope someday you can explore Ignatian spirituality.
Oh, well, yeah,
You are at Fordham, so you know.
You're calling me back to it. Yeah,
Right, I think that's critical.
It's been a while.
And this is for everybody here too. Thomas Keating, Sharon and David, don't listen to me. Thomas Keating's Centering Prayer and Thomas Merton's teachings on prayer are for monks. They're about total emptiness and the via negativa. Sharon's, you're disagreeing with me, but that's my general take. Whereas Ignatius is saying, for most of us, we need Jesus. Emily, all I'm saying is when you're doing your centering prayer and you're empty and mindful and present, then have the risen Jesus sit there with you and talk to him. All of us can do that. Go and be with the risen Jesus in your prayer and talk to him and let him talk to you and let him tell you, do not be afraid, peace be with you. Now you go forth and walk the way of nonviolence. And maybe on that happy note, we might wrap it up. Does that sound like a doable thing for everybody? I hope this has been helpful. I have no idea. You haven't said a word. You've all been bored and just quiet and maybe muted. I'm not sure. Please continue to pray for our little project, the Beatitude Center for the Nonviolent Jesus, and please continue to support it. Please tell people about it. It's the only way we can really spread this word. I'm going to have a really great workshop on Daniel Berrigan's 100th birthday, or the eve of it, May 8th, and Bill Kellerman will be there. And I hope you can get Bill's book. And then there's many other wonderful events, some that I haven't posted yet. Later in the year, I'm going to have Jim Lawson and I are going to have a conversation on nonviolence. Jim Forrest, I invited him to do one. He said, well, why aren't you inviting me to do two? Okay. So he's going to do two Saturdays on Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, Daniel Berrigan, and Thich Nhat Hanh, and he was very close with each of them. And then in November, Raj Mahan Gandhi, my friend, who's Gandhi's grandson and wrote the best biography of Gandhi, he's going to do a whole afternoon on Gandhi with us. It's terrific stuff, you all. So help tell people about it, and thank you so much. And so my last words are, peace be with you. Go in peace. God bless you. Be Easter people. Take heart and rejoice. And I'll see you on the road to hope. Bye-bye, and God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.